So now we're going to run through the section on dietary fats. So probably people's biggest question out of this section is butter or margarine? Which one's better for me? So is it true or false? Well, I want you to hold that thought in your mind as we go through this next section, and then I want you to be able to answer it at the end for me. So dietary fats. So we've got different kinds of dietary fats. Can you think of any at the moment? So the ones that come to mind are, saturated, which I've gone on and on and on about so far, and we're going to now explain what that is. And then we've got unsaturated fats. So saturated fats basically are found in our animal products. So they're the types of fats that we were talking about before. They stick to our arteries and blood vessels, and they cause heart disease. They increase our LDL, and you might remember LDL from the cholesterol section. We want to try and keep it low. So they do exactly the opposite to what's good for our health. They increase our triglycerides, and they lead to heart disease. So we want to try and keep our saturated fats low. So I want you to try and think of what some saturated fats are. Can you think of any right now? Basically, having a look at our slide, saturated fats are everywhere. So biscuits, cakes, pastries, fried foods, fatty foods, animal fat, full cream dairy products, chocolate, pies, pasties and sausage rolls. I'm sorry, I'm sure all your favourite foods are in there somewhere, aren't they? So we do talk about variety and moderation. So we want to try and keep those saturated fats to just a sometimes food as a treat, keeping them to a minimum, because they do cause damage in our body. While we're on the topic of saturated fats, there is one that's a little bit tricky. It's a little bit of a misfit. And can you think of what that is? I'll tell you what it is. It's palm oil and also coconut oil. They're a vegetable type, a plant seed oil, but they're saturated. So we also want to keep them low because they are saturated. So what palm is, what they do is they clear Southeast Asian rainforests and they plant those palm plantations. And then, they end up being quite a cheap oil. And they come into our food supply, and the double whammy is that on our products like biscuits in Australia, they can label palm oil as vegetable oil. So when you look at an ingredients list, it's hidden and you can't see it. But then if we're looking at the nutrition information panel, which I'll teach you about soon, the saturated fat's high, and you think, there's no animal products in there. Where does that come from? And that's from your palm oil. Coconut milk as well is saturated. It may not be as sticky to our arteries as we once thought. There's a lot of studies going on with coconut milk at the moment and coconut cream. So it's a little bit of a wait and see at the moment. Trans fats. Trans fats are found in animal products, and they're similar to saturated fat. They tend to come in the same types of foods, also in ruminating animals and in double hydrogenated products. Now that sounds confusing. But my main point here to you is that trans fats aren't really too prevalent in our Australian food supply. So if we're looking just at Australia, we're pretty good. In 2006, our government actually took a lot of the trans fats out of our food supply. So it's more a problem in places like America. Trans fats are created by hydrogenization, which is where they put a liquid oil under intense pressure, they hydrogenate it, and it becomes a solid at room temperature rather than a liquid. And that's, again, that changes a molecule so that it can stick to our arteries and blood vessels. So it's not ideal. So by decreasing our saturated fats, we also decrease our trans fats as well. So how can we lower our saturated and trans fats? A few little quick tips. Avoiding full cream dairy, butter, lard, dripping, taking the skin off chicken, cutting the visible fat off our meat, reducing palm and coconut oil, reducing our fried and takeaway foods, and reducing our cakes and pastries, so just sometimes for those foods like we were talking about before. And choosing things like olive oil or canola, lean meats, low fat or skim dairy, and cooking snack foods at home using good oils or a minimum amount of oil. So what about the fat in dairy products? Well, you've just told me that dairy is good for me, and now you're telling me that it's not. Which is it? Well, there's two different parts of dairy. There's the normal part and then there's the fat section. And the fat section is what we want to try and reduce because that's the bit that's full of saturated fat. So dairy does contain calcium, plus a lot of other nutrients as well. Calcium is good for our teeth and bones, as I'm sure you were probably thinking. So we want to try and choose skim milks. low-fat dairy, low-fat cheese, low-fat soy products. So obviously there's no saturated fat in our soy products because it doesn't come from an animal, so that's a quick and easy way. But there's nothing wrong with a normal cow's milk either. What about if we don't have milk or soy? Then you may need a calcium supplement because obviously we don't want our bones to be leaching calcium. Calcium's a mineral we can't make in our body at all. It's called an essential nutrient. So what happens if we don't have calcium for a fair while is our body still needs it for our producing all the different things that it's needed for. So it leaches it out of our bones. So takes it out of our bones, puts it into our bloodstream for use, and over time that calcium getting taken out of our bones weakens them and makes them brittle and makes them sort of, less dense than they were before. And that condition is called osteoporosis. And if you've got weak, brittle bones and you fall, you're more likely to fracture or break a bone, which is terrible. So we want to make sure we get enough calcium. If your doctor does recommend calcium supplementation, it's best to have less than 600 milligrams at a time, so your pharmacist can help you with the doses there. If you need to take more than that, it's a good idea to split the doses apart so that you can only absorb a certain amount of calcium at one time. So obviously making sure they don't interact with prescription medications. A better form of calcium is calcium citrate. There's calcium citrate, which is well absorbed, and calcium carbonate, which isn't as well absorbed. So just keeping that in mind as well. And you can take calcium citrate with or without food, but taking calcium carbonate is better with food because your stomach acid helps that absorption there. So now we're going to talk about unsaturated fats. So saturated fats are bad for our health. Unsaturated fats have positive effects on our blood cholesterol. So you remember that good cholesterol, keeping it high? Our unsaturated fats help with that. So they mop up that fatty deposits on our arteries. So I guess you've got an artery and you've got that hardening that happens over time, and that's irreversible, unfortunately. But what we can do is that soft sort of fatty layer on the inside, if we have that, it's called atherosclerosis. The unsaturated fats and the good cholesterols can actually chip away at that and help clear them over time. And that helps protect against heart disease. So which foods are high in unsaturated fats? Can you think of any? So olives, avocado, nuts and seeds, oily fish, so our omega-3s, and also our polyunsaturated or monounsaturated margarine, but not dairy blend. What would dairy blend indicate it has in it? Generally it's butter. So unsaturated fats are divided into mono and poly. Monounsaturated help lower our LDL cholesterol. So back before when I was saying if your LDL's high, what do we do? Increasing the monounsaturated fats, things like olive oil, canola oil, peanuts, macadamias, almonds, cashews and avocados, they can help with that. Polyunsaturated is divided into omega-6 and omega-3. So omega-3 is what we're really going to focus on because they're our oily fishes. So they're the things that help with our protecting our heart. So now I want you to have a look at this slide up on the screen. What we're going to look at is figuring out, so that question I asked you before, is butter better than margarine? Now we're going to answer that question. So that sort of pinky colour is saturated fat, and as you can see there down the left-hand side, that's your saturated fat. The blue colour and the yellow colour are unsaturated fats, and they're the ones that are better for our heart, remember. So I want you to look at a few different ones on this slide. So we've got canola at the top, that's quite low in saturated fat, you can see there. And then we're going down, you've got olive oil, that's quite low, and then you've got palm oil. And you can see that that's almost half saturated fat, so that's not as good for us. And then coconut oil, now that looks very scary there, COFA, so cooking, that COFA that you cook with. But as we said before, coconut oil may not be as sticky and gluey for our arteries and blood vessels as we at first thought. So again, we're waiting for those studies and more evidence to come out there. Down the bottom there, we've got margarine and butter. So you can see that margarine only has 16 per 100 grams there of saturated fat, but butter has 53. So knowing that saturated fat is bad for our heart and unsaturated fats are better, which one is healthier, butter or margarine? margarine. So what can I do? Replacing saturated fat with unsaturated fat and using healthier cooking methods as well, like grilling, poaching, steaming or stir frying in a bit of your healthy oil rather than deep frying in your fats. What about rice bran oil? Have you seen rice bran oil? It used to have a heart on it and said the Heart Healthy Oil. It used to have the Heart Foundation tick as well, but that's actually been removed recently. So rice bran oil is a really good case of marketing, and they market their product very well. So it says the Heart Healthy Oil on the front of it. It says contains sterols. Now you remember how we talked about sterols before? You need 3 grams of sterols per day, so 3 serves, 1 gram per serve, to be able to help reduce that LDL. Rice bran oil, to be able to get that amount, you need 25 teaspoons per day, which is half a cup. If you drink half a cup of oil per day, what's going to happen to you? You'll probably gain weight. And what's one of the biggest risk factors for our cholesterol? Weight. So we come around the full circle back the other way. So it's not ideal. Rice bran oil, yes, it does have a high smoking point. It is easier for cooking, suitable for cooking at higher temperatures. Yes, it's got vitamin E and other antioxidants, but many of our seed oils do as well. But the thing we're looking at here is that it's got 22% saturated fat. Now, the Heart Foundation cutoff is about 20. So unfortunately, this product doesn't meet the tick. And it's, you know, it does market itself. It says on the bottle there, good for you, good for your food. 100% pure, no cholesterol. Well, we know that cholesterol comes from an animal, don't we? So unfortunately, that's a good example of marketing. But rice bran oil fits into a healthy, balanced diet just like any of our other oils do. There's nothing particularly unique or special about it. So that next slide there, when we're looking at that red colour down the left again, we've now got rice bran oil on this slide. And as you can see, canola's 8, olive oil's 14, like we looked at before. Rice bran's down there at 22. So it gives you a little bit of perspective. All right. So canola oil is another bit of a myth. People think that canola oil is harmful and toxic and not good for your health. There was a bit of an internet rumour sort of going on, which is where a lot of these things start. But back then, when they used to produce it, it was made from rapeseed oil, and that had higher levels of arucic or arusic acid, and that's toxic in large amounts. Now, canola, interestingly, is produced from canola plants, which is good. You would have expected that before, but it's just a different genus of the plant. But it's low in saturated fat and it's safe for us to consume. So there's no problems at all with canola that we know of at this point in time. A lot of people have questions about cooking with oils. You know, does overheating make my oil unhealthy? So that's quite a multifaceted question. It depends. So your local fish and chip shop that might be a bit dodgy has the oil in those big vats, and you know they might put the oil in, goodness knows when, boil it and boil it and boil it, and it's a very ultra high temperature, so about 200 degrees over time. And what can happen is if you've got so saturated fat is a single bond, and I like to think of it that going through your body, it's quite lonely and it wants to latch onto something, and so it latches onto your arteries and blood vessels, if you can think of it that way, and that blocks them over time. So that's bad, we don't want that. What we want is unsaturated, and they've got a double bond. So as they go through your body, they leave everything alone. They don't stick to our arteries and blood vessels. So they might have started with the saturated fat in that fish and chip shop oil, but they may have started with an unsaturated fat, and this is where we trip up because it might have a sign, and I've seen it before. We only use Sunola oil. I thought, what's that? Well, it turns out it's canola and sunflower mixed together, which is lovely, and we know that they're unsaturated. However, what happens at high temperatures when it's boiling and boiling all day at 190, 200 degrees is even if it does start out as an unsaturated fat with a double bond, over time that double bond with that heat can rupture it and it becomes a saturated fat, and then it behaves that way in our body as a saturated fat, which is not good for our heart. So when you're cooking at home, it's unlikely you'll be able to get it to that temperature for long enough to be able to break those bonds. Not forgetting that the food you cook does soak in that fat, but if it is good oil, then and you're not watching your weight too much, then it's okay to use a little bit of good quality oil, even if you are deep frying at home. But obviously shallow frying, steaming, there are healthier cooking methods as well. Can I reheat my cooking oil? We do usually recommend just heating it once, particularly if it's a high temperature, but changing it after a few uses if it is a lower temperature. And what is the shelf life of oil? Generally it says it on the bottle, but heat, light and exposure to air can reduce that shelf life as well and cause it to go rancid more quickly. So just storing them in a cool, dark place is sensible. So now we're going to move on to omega-3s, and you might remember that they're polyunsaturated fats. So they're of the unsaturated variety, and omega-3s are good for us. They help lower our LDL, so remember we want to try and keep that low, that cholesterol. They lower our triglycerides, so those circulating fats in our bloodstream. They slow that build-up of that fatty atherosclerotic arteries, so that blockages in our arteries. They lower our blood pressure just a little bit, and they reduce our risk of death from heart attacks and strokes as well. So omega-3s are mainly found in fish. They are also found in plant sources, but unfortunately the plant sources are quite poorly converted into the bit that's usable. So our plant sources we'll talk about in a bit. If you are vegetarian, they can be useful, but if not, generally we recommend your omega-3s coming from your marine fish sources. So aiming for 2 to 3 fish meals a week. But if you don't like fish, you've got ALA, which is an essential fatty acid that comes from our plants. So we've got things like nuts and seeds, particularly our linseeds or flax seeds, and our walnuts. They're higher sources. Soybeans, dark green leafy veggies, and our canola oil. So they're our main sources of ALA. And what happens though with ALA is if you've got this much to start with, the conversion rate to be able to be converted to EPA and then further to DHA, which is the form that we need it to be able to be useful in, is quite poor. So we do recommend omega-3 supplements, and for everybody the amount is just a little bit different. So you can have a look how much omega-3 fish have, and we'll put up a table here for you to have a look at some of the sources and pick out your favourite fish and see how much is in there per 150 grams of fish. But basically, if you're not having fish regularly, then we do recommend you take supplements. So how much is recommended? So in terms of fish oil supplementation, if you are a patient who's had a cardiac event or heart disease, then the recommended amount of omega-3 is 1,000 milligrams a day. If you're a friend or family member or you haven't had a cardiac event and you're just watching this for interest, your level is 500 milligrams per day. Fish oil is also useful for decreasing our triglycerides, those circulating fats in the bloodstream, and for that it's about 3,000 milligrams of omega-3. And the other thing it's useful for is arthritis. So if we do have arthritis, the level that can help with that, because omega-3s are a potent anti-inflammatory agent, is about 2,700 milligrams per day. So have you got your number in your mind? All right, we'll go through some of the supplementation. So a lot of people say, well, what about krill oil? What about fish oil? What about red salmon oil? What about the liquid oil? Which one do I have? There's so many. Basically, all you want is the right amount of omega-3. It doesn't matter which brand, whether it's a home brand or whether it's a more expensive brand. As long as it's got that omega-3 in there, it's going to behave like that in your body. So if we're looking at, say, this king krill here, it says totally natural, health and wellness. It's quite shiny, the packet. Premium double strength. And on the front there it says 1,000 milligrams of krill oil. So you think, all right, I'm a heart disease patient. I need 1,000 milligrams a day. I'll just have how many of these? 1. Seems quite easy, doesn't it? Ultra omega-3 for arthritis, heart health, cardiovascular system, same thing really. Cholesterol, not a lot of evidence on that yet, but we're still waiting for the studies to come out. Brain health, nervous system health, similar there. And eye health. Really, we're looking at it for the arthritis and the cardiac events at this point in time. So what I want you to do when you're looking at your fish oil supplements is completely ignore whatever it says on the front. And I want you to turn over to the back, and we're looking for 2 acronyms. EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. So what we need to do with those 2 is figure out how much omega-3 is next to that acronym, and all you have to do is add it up. Very easy. So this one here, we've got 150 plus 90. So that's per capsule. So this gives us 240 milligrams of omega-3 per capsule. So let's say you need 1,000. Well, that's how many capsules you'd be taking per day. So if you need 2,700, you're taking more than 10 capsules per day just for that one day. Now, this here costs $64.95 from the shop, and it's got 60 capsules. So you're essentially taking more than a sixth of these. This wouldn't even last you a week. So that's quite an expensive way of getting in your omega-3. Having a look at this one, and this is just quite a generic brand. It says on the front there, odourless fish oil. It doesn't need to be odourless, unless you particularly like fish burps. 1,000 milligrams. So what are we going to do? We're not going to look at the front, because remember that that's the weight of the oil inside the capsule. Turn over, and we've got EPA on here per capsule is 180, and THA is 120. So we want to add those two both up. We get 300 milligrams per capsule. Now this cost me about $8, and you get about 200 of them. So let's say even if we have high triglycerides and we want 3,000 per day, then we're taking 10. Now 10's still a lot. So what we might want to do then in that instance, if you are needing to take a high dose, say 2,700 if you have arthritis, or the 3,000 if you're taking it for your triglycerides, you might want to have a liquid fish oil. And there's a few different brands, and it doesn't matter, as I said, which brand. This is just an example. So this one here, EPA 163 and DHA 108. So that gives us 271 per mil. So, you know, about 10 mils if you were looking at 2,700 per day, and that's done. Now, it's not particularly pleasant tasting. This one's flavoured with lemon and lime oils, but what you can do is float it on top of a bit of orange juice, shot it down, and it's gone, and that acidity helps get rid of the fish taste. Some of my other patients mix it in with a tin of tuna and they put it on their sandwich at lunchtime. My main point for you is if you are taking a lot of capsules, don't follow it up with a hot cup of tea or coffee, because that goes down faster than they do, melts a little gelatin on the outside, and you get those fish burps. No one wants that. So throughout this whole section, we've been telling you about fats that are healthy and unhealthy. And when we're talking about healthy and unhealthy, we're specifically meaning healthy or unhealthy for your heart. So health in terms of fats for your weight is a different thing. So fats are quite dense in kilojoules. They're high in calories or energy per amount that you eat. So if you do eat a lot of fat, whether it is good or bad for your heart, you will still gain weight. So if you've got a cup of butter, which we're saying is not ideal, or you've got a cup of margarine, it doesn't matter which one you eat, in terms of your weight, you'll still put on the same amount of weight because it is still metabolised, digested and absorbed in your body as the same. The difference is that one is good for your heart and one is less.